Welcome to the shop. Steve here at SKS Props, and today we're going to make a gnome home out of HD foam. Here was my proof of concept gnome house. Now, it doesn't look all that great, but it doesn't need to. Proof of concept pieces like this I usually throw together in about 20 to 30 minutes just to see how they're going to look for the final piece. Now, once I've got my templates for those, I start to work on the final version. Now, one like this, main structure for it is pretty much made out of 10mm HD foam, which you guys, of course, can find over at Blick Art Materials. A lot of the details are made out of 6mm and 2mm. Now, the top of this mushroom piece on here is all covered with foam clay, because I can get an organic look out of it, but it's very, very easy to sand to get this smooth surface. Now, I want to show you guys all the steps that it takes to put this little house together. We got a lot to do, so let's get started. The first thing I do is take the template for the bottom of the mushroom house, transfer that onto some 10mm HD foam with a pencil. Using a utility knife, I cut out each piece, making sure to keep the knife straight up and down. I don't want any of these cuts to be at an angle. Once I have all 6 pieces cut out, I pull out some craft paper to protect my cutting surface and start to glue these together using some contact cement. Because this contact cement is a little bit thinner, 2 coats are needed for perfect adhesion. Notice the small marks along the perimeter of the foam. These help me line up the pieces to make sure that I get the proper curve. When putting these pieces together, I like to line up the dots first, and then I'll go back and firmly press together the seams. Adding section to section, I work my way around the base of this mushroom until I have my completed shape. Now the sides are a little bit flat, so I take my heat gun and lightly heat the surface, making sure not to burn the foam, while pressing and stretching it to give it a rounded shape. This is a technique you can do to the pieces before gluing them together as well. Moving on to the top dome of the mushroom, I take my template, just like before, and transfer that onto some 10mm HD foam, making sure once again to mark all the little notches on the side so we can properly line up the pieces. Once again, I cut out all the pieces using a utility knife and start to apply my contact cement to the sides. Now, because these pieces are a little bit larger, I'm going to use my heat gun to heat up the foam and roll it. This should help me to manipulate them a little bit easier while putting the dome together. Just like the base, I line up all the dots first, making sure to firmly press the top of it together as well. I thought it would be easier to make each half of the dome separately and then glue them together to make the final piece. Now you can see approximately how the top of the mushroom and the bottom go together. I want to start cleaning up my seams, and to do that I'm going to take a very smooth sanding drum and go over all the lines where the foam has been glued together. This process was done for the base and the top. To give the top some separation, I cut out a 5" by 5" 10mm HD foam square. This is going to be glued into the top of the dome. The base will eventually attach to this. To give the top of this mushroom a more organic look, I'm first going to start off by using a heat gun and heating up the lower edge and bending that out. Secondly, I'm going to use some foam clay. I'm going to place this on top to give it a more textured surface. To help the foam clay stick properly, I'm going to wet the surface with a little bit of water, and then using thin sheets of the foam clay, I'm going to press that onto the top. Now when I'm placing different layers of foam clay together, I'm constantly dipping my fingers in the water to help smooth out the surface. Another thing I like to do is to use a tongue depressor to help move the material around. You can see how the foam clay gives you a very organic look. Now a lot of this is very exaggerated, and that's okay because I'm going to go back and sand it down. After you're finished sculpting, allow the foam clay to dry for 24 to 48 hours. After about a day, the foam clay is dried enough that I can start the sanding process. Foam clay sands extremely easy, so I'm just going to use a sanding sponge, knocking down a lot of the high points. I want the bottom of the dome to have a little bit of character and not just be straight across, so I mark that with a pencil and use a rotary tool to give it a little bit of a wave. After I go through my initial pass, I clean up the edge, once again using a sanding sponge. Using a rotary tool and a smooth sanding drum, I start to add texture to the base of the mushroom. Now this will do 2 things. It'll give it a really cool appearance, but also help hide the seam lines. Before I attach the top, I want to start to add the accessories to the bottom of the house. First up is going to be the door frame cut out of some 6mm HD foam. The shape of this piece is lightly traced onto the base of the mushroom, and then I use a stone bit to add additional textures to make it look like wood. That same textured appearance is also applied to the door trim. After the door trim has been detailed, it is attached to the base using some super glue. You can see how that additional texture really stands out compared to the rest of the piece. Cover for the front door is made in the same fashion. The template is traced onto some 6mm foam. It is detailed using the stone bit and also glued into place using super glue. The template for the window frame was also traced onto some 6mm HD foam and finished in the same manner. The main difference here being the template for the window pane was traced on some 2mm HD foam. This will give it a nice smooth surface. All the components for the window were then detailed and glued into place with super glue. To make the trim for the inside of the window, I used small strips of 2mm HD foam. These strips were marked, cut, and glued into place. I pulled out a package of 10mm HD foam round dowels, cut off a little bit, and this will act as the doorknob. It's time to start adding details to the top of the mushroom, and the first thing we're going to add up there is going to be the window. The template for this piece was transferred onto some 6mm HD foam and cut out with utility knife. Now the big thing to note here is the part that attaches to the mushroom was cut at a 45-degree angle. The placement of this piece was lightly traced onto the surface, and once again it was detailed using a stone bit. Just like the lower window, the window pane is glued on first, and then the window frame is glued on top. The window sill and trim are also glued on in the same way. To start fabricating the chimney for the house, I cut a 15mm HD foam round dowel. A small piece of 6mm foam is attached to the top of the chimney and it is glued onto the side. To make it look like the chimney is nailed to the mushroom, small detailed pieces are cut out of 2mm HD foam. The end of a pin is pressed into the foam to simulate the rivets. The base of the mushroom is cut flat, and then using super glue is attached to the plate that we had installed earlier. To fabricate all the spots for the top of the mushroom, these were just freehand cut out of some 2mm HD foam. I test fit these in several different places, and once I was satisfied with where they were going to go, they were then glued into place. After looking at the piece as a whole, I really felt that it needed something on the other side, so I got my templates back out and created an additional window to put on the left. Plasti-Dip was used to seal the foam, and after the first thin layer had dried, a second layer was applied. Once those layers had cured, Krylon Red Rust Primer was added as my base color layer. I'm going to start off by painting the base of the mushroom, and to do this I'm going to use Liquitex brand Heavy Body Unbleached Titanium. This will be applied to the base mushroom using a mop brush. The first layer is very watered down because I just want the paint to cover the entire surface. This is also sped up by using a hairdryer. The second layer was applied with much less water and more paint while still allowing the red rust primer to show through. For the top of the mushroom, Utrecht brand Cadmium Red Medium was applied with a filbert brush in between the spots. I add an additional layer of this paint in certain areas to act as a highlight. Utrecht brand Burnt Sienna was then brushed onto the door and window details to simulate wood. Going back to the top, unbleached titanium was applied to the spots. This was watered down quite a bit to make it easier to move around. Unfortunately, because they are raised, I had to go back in with a detail brush and paint a lot of the edges. Once they had all dried, just like the base, I went in with more unbleached titanium, less water, more pigment, and dry brushed that onto the spots. A small amount of Liquitex Heavy Body Brilliant Blue was mixed with the unbleached titanium. This was applied to the window panes using a detail brush. As a highlight layer, Liquitex brand Raw Sienna was dry brushed onto the door and windows. To paint the chimney, Liquitex Heavy Body Iridescent Rich Silver was applied to the surface, still allowing that rust red primer to kind of show through. This color was also used to finish the doorknob. I had never used this product before, but it's an iridescent tint from Utrecht Brown. I thought it would work great for the windows. It goes on pretty transparent, so any color that's underneath shows through. After I'd painted the windows, I applied a little bit to the top of the mushroom to simulate a dew-like sheen. The base of the mushroom was still a little too clean, so I took some of that Liquitex brand Raw Sienna and muddied up the bottom. Liquitex Heavy Body Parchment was used as my final highlight layer for the spots on top of the mushroom. Now notice I'm not covering the entire spot, I'm selectively placing the paint on there to give it a different color value. So you guys can see the basic steps that it takes to put together a little gnome house for your inside decoration or out in your flower bed. Now be sure to download my templates so you can put together your own. And also, this is just a basic version of this. Feel free to be more elaborate with the ones that you create. Now if you guys are enjoying these videos, be sure to give them a thumbs up and share them with your friends and family. And if you're building any of my builds, be sure to tag me and Blick on Twitter and Instagram because we love seeing your progress. Until next time, thanks for stopping by.